Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Tonight I'd like to welcome everyone to our event, Poetries of the Stranger. I'd also like to welcome our virtual guests, which we are streaming to online, including our guest book collaborators in India, Peru, France, Ireland, and I believe South America. Of course, I'd also like to thank our honored poets tonight for making this event possible, James Tate, Fanny Howe, and John Ashbery. Before I introduce these poets, there's someone very special who I'd like to come up to just say a few words about the guest book project. His name is Professor Richard Carney. He's the founder and director. And Richard, if you don't mind, could you please come up and say a few words?
Thank you, Adam, and I'd like to second Adam's welcome to you all, our guests this evening, and particularly our three poets, who Adam will be introducing shortly. A very brief word about the guest book project, of which tonight's festival is a part, a very important part. The guest book is a project which endeavours to investigate the intimate and complex liaisons between hospitality and hostility. The root, our Indo-European linguistic root of these two terms in English, hostis, hospes, is similar in German. And the purpose of the project is to try and wrestle hospitality from hostility, recognizing this original bond between the two that is so intriguing and also so disturbing. In that wrestle, the attempt is, and it's a wager and a risk rather than a fait accompli, the wager is to turn the stranger into a guest and the adversary into a friend. But in this respect, hospitality is not seen as some kind of easy abstract virtue or cheap grace. It is a struggle that's intellectual, political, and cultural. The guest book project could be described, charitably or uncharitably, as something of a hydra-headed monster that speaks in different voices. And some of these voices include an interdisciplinary seminar entitled Hosting the Stranger that we've been conducting here at Boston College under the aegis of the Institute of the Liberal Arts, hosted by David Quigley, our dean, over the last 4 months. It is a seminar that has drawn from faculty and students, including 14 different departments here in this university, but also in the neighboring wider Boston University community, Harvard, MIT, University of Massachusetts, and others. And indeed, it has also welcomed visitors from out of town and overseas. Secondly, the guest book project has spoken in the form of a concert and two conferences, one entitled Interreligious Hospitality and the other coming up on the 2nd of May, entitled Phenomenologies of the Stranger. Thirdly, the guest book comprises a series of international performances, guest book performances, that will be hosted by 5 different cities of the 5 different wisdom traditions. Limerick in Ireland, Bangalore in India, Kathmandu in Nepal, Jerusalem in Israel, Palestine, and Cairo, representing the Islamic. These performances will involve the transport of a guest book and a guest box that is being designed by BC in collaboration with MIT Media Lab that will be received in each of these centres, which first will become a host and then a guest to the next centre. And I hope we won't stop in Cairo. It may go on. And each of these events will be recorded on our guest book website, interactive website, and also as part of an ongoing DVD documentary. But a fourth voice, and the most important voice for us this evening, is that of Poetics of the Stranger. The three poets will speak for themselves in their own voices, as only they can do. And it only remains for me at this point to hand you back to our assistant director of the project, Adam Fitzgerald, a young, bright and brilliant poet in his own right and academic, who has been working long and hard with great diligence and devotion to bring tonight to us all, to make it possible, and without him we would not be here. So I would like to just say thank you, Adam, and let the play begin.
The last thing we need at a poetry reading is more prefatory matter, but there are a series of people that we really do have to thank before we begin this evening who have made this event possible, and I'd just like to very quickly give them their due and their credit. No hospitality without gratitude and thanks. The first is the guest book team and consultants who have worked tirelessly all semester, helping us put together every event, including the Noam Chomsky lecture that will happen next week. These assistants include James Taylor, who's here this evening, Christopher Yates, Kasia Simonovich, Unjin Lee, Elise Purcell, and in particular I'd like to thank Paul Bennett, who has just done such a tremendous organizing job, and I really thank you. Secondly, we need to thank the Institute for the Liberal Arts. This is the newly created Institute for the Humanities at Boston College that is allowing for the guest book project to happen, and it's currently directed by Dean David Quigley, and he's done such a terrific job in supporting every aspect of the project, so we would really like to thank him. The Boston Review, who co-sponsored this event, in particular Tim Donnelly, the poetry editor, and Will Furtman, who's here this evening as the public relations assistant. The Academy of the American Poets, who helped promote the event, also as a co-sponsor for tonight's event, and the poetry readings throughout the weekend, and in particular the executive director, Tree Swenson. In addition, Jonathan Sage, Stephanie Harold, Ben Birnbaum, Simone Carney, the Religion and the Arts, Alice Lyons, Mark Benjamin, Suzanne Matson, English professor at Boston College, Provost Bert Gertza, and many others. And finally, of course, I would like to thank Richard Carney, whose welcoming vision of hospitality has really allowed us at Boston College, I think, for these last couple of months, to have a truly extraordinary lineup of speakers, guests, scholars, and artists, including this poetry festival. So Richard, thank you very much, and to everyone. Okay, now on to this evening's event, which I'm very excited about, because I love all of these poets very deeply. One could ask how poetry has anything to do with the theme of hospitality and hosting the stranger. Wallace Stevens wrote in a poem called Tea at the Palace of Hoon, and there I found myself more truly and more strange. Poetry is where I believe we go to find ourselves in equal portions, true and strange. We become strangers as we read these poems, revealing our own private imaginative lives, and we also become hosts, welcoming these poets and their visions. They are the strangers in the midst, and their language is both strange-making and quite exciting. In their poetry, we are capable of going on the most dazzling provocations of imaginative life and originality. In their lines, we can hear, smell, taste, and see what is most true and strange within us. We witness the eruptions of the uncanny, the perplexing, and in the work of James Tate, Fanny Howe, and John Ashbery, please welcome. Please come. Please come and sit down. Hello. We witness just an array of voices that these poets are able to incorporate into their work, and it's truly extraordinary. So now I'd like to introduce our first reader for tonight's event, James Tate. And if I could just remind us to turn our cell phones off right now, that would be great. If anybody just coming in, if we can just turn our cell phones off, and we'll check our missed calls later. James Tate was born in Kansas City, Missouri in 1943. He is the author of 15 books of poetry, including Shroud of the Gnome, Worshipful Company of Fletchers, which won the National Book Award in 1994, Selected Poems, which won the Pulitzer Prize and the William Carlos Williams Award in 1991, Distance from Loved Ones, The Oblivion Ha-Ha, Absences, and The Lost Pilot, which was selected by Dudley Fitz for the Yale Younger Series Younger Poets. In addition to his poetry, Tate is the author of 2 books of prose, including Dreams of a Robot Dancing Bee and The Route as Briefed. He has edited the Best American Poetry for 1997. His honors include a National Institute of Arts and Letters Award for Poetry, the Tanning Prize and fellowships from the Guggenheim Foundation, and the National Endowment for the Arts. He teaches at the University of Massachusetts in Amherst. Ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, please welcome James Tate.
Thank you very much. It's very nice to be here. We're supposed to read a poem by somebody else, and to start with, and my poem is by my poem is by the Swedish poet Thomas Tranströmer, translated by Robert Bly. This is called Start of a Late Autumn Novel. The boat has the smell of oil, and something whirs all the time, like an obsessive thought. The spotlight is turned on. We are approaching the pier. I'm the only one who is to get off here. Would you like the gangplank? No. I take a wobbly step right out into the night and find myself standing on the pier, on the island. I feel soggy and unwieldy. A butterfly just crept from the cocoon. The plastic clothes bag in my hands like misshapen wings. I turn and watch the boat go away with its lit windows, then grope my way up to the house I know so well that has been empty. All the houses at this landing are empty now. It is lovely to sleep here. I lie on my back, unsure if I'm asleep or awake. A few books I've just read sail by like schooners on their way to the Bermuda Triangle, where they will disappear without a trace. I hear a sound reverberating like a drum with poor memory, a thing that the wind thumps again and again against some other object the earth is holding tight. If the night is not just the absence of light, if night really is something, it has to be this sound. The sound of a slow heart heard through this stethoscope. It beats, falls silent for a moment, comes back, as if it's being were in a zigzag over the border. Possibly someone is there, inside the wall, thumping, someone who loves, someone who belongs to the other world, but who got left here anyway. He thumps, wants to go back. Too late. Wasn't on time down here. Wasn't on time up there. Didn't make it on board in time. The other world is also this one. The next morning I see a rustly branch with gold and brown leaves hanging on. A root body thrown upward. Stones with faces. The forest is full of monsters that I love. left behind when the ship sailed. This is called Uneasy About the Sounds of Some Night Wandering Animal. On the way to work this morning, the newsman on the radio said, "A big part of reality has been removed. It has been reported. Details are not available at this time. It's just that I am told you will find things different on your drive to work this morning. Some roads will be missing. Whole areas of the city may be gone. However, the good news is no signs of violence have been detected." I turned the radio off. There wasn't the usual rush hour, for which I was grateful. I wasn't even sure I was on the right road. There were empty fields where I had remembered rows and rows of apartment buildings. Then I went into a long tunnel, and I had no memory of there being a tunnel. When I came out of it, there was nothing. Or rather, I guess it was a desert, as I had never been in the desert before. I looked around for signs of the city. The jackrabbit scurried across the road, and up ahead a policeman was leaning against his motorcycle. I slowed down instinctively and then pulled over to a stop. "Good morning, officer," I said. "I seem to have taken a wrong turn. Could you tell me where I am?" "Not exactly," he said. "This seems to be a new area. It wasn't here before. We're still trying to identify it. I suggest you drive with caution because, well, we have no information on it yet." I noticed that he was about to cry. "Well, thanks," I said. My stomach was sinking. I was certain to be late to work. I didn't know what to do. Part of me wanted to drive on to see what was out there, and part of me wanted to turn back, though I wasn't certain of what I would find there. So I drove on for miles and miles, the sand dunes shifting and stirring, and the occasional hawk or buzzard circling overhead. Then the road disappeared, and I was forced to stop and looked behind me. But that road too was gone, blown over by sand in a few seconds. I got out of the car, glad that I had some water with me. I looked around, and it was all the same. Nothing made any sense. I tried to call Harvey at the office on my cell phone. I couldn't believe when he answered. "Harvey, it's Carl. I'm out here in this new place. It's all sand and there are no roads," I said. "We'll come get you," he said, "but I don't know where I am. I mean, I don't even know if it exists," I said. "Don't be ridiculous, Carl. Of course it exists. Just look around and give me something to go by," he said. "There's nothing here. Oh, there was a tunnel some miles back, and a policeman leaning against his motorcycle. That's the last thing I saw," I said. "Was it the old Larchmont tunnel?" he said. "I don't know. It could have been. I was lost already," I said. "Okay, I'm going to come get you. Just stay put," he said. I waited and waited, and then I started walking. I know I wasn't supposed to, but I was restless and hoped to find a right way out. I had lost sight of my car and had no idea where I was. The sun was blinding me and I couldn't think straight. I barely knew who I was. And then, as if by miracle, I heard Harvey's voice call my name. I looked around and couldn't see him. Carl, I'm here, he said, and I still couldn't see him. We've fallen off. We're in the fallen off zone, he said. What? What does that mean? I said. We've separated. It may be temporary. It's too soon to tell, he said. But where are we? We must be in some relation to something, I said. I think we're parallel, he said. Parallel to what? I said. Parallel to everything that matters, he said. Then that's good, I said. I still couldn't see him, and night was coming on. It was a parallel night, much like the other, and that was some comfort, cold comfort, as they like to say. This is called national security. I said, I want to go home. I told you we have no home, Ann said. What happened to our home, I said. The government took it, she said. What for, I said. They said it was for strategic reasons, she said. And thus we commenced our roaming. Mostly we stayed at campsites along the way. We had a tent and sleeping bags, a couple of pots and pans. I was confused about what had happened to us, but I also liked the adventure. Once a man came over and said he and his wife would like to share their dinner with us. Ann said her husband wasn't feeling well. I said, I feel great. We sat around the campfire and talked. The man said he used to be a dentist, but now he was a gold miner. You should have been taking those little gold caps out of people's mouths all along. You'd be rich now, I said, and plowed her elbow into my ribs. We're headed for the Klondike, his wife said. It's best to stay out of the strategic zones, Ann said. They nodded in unison. But I still don't know where they are, I said. They all looked at me, but didn't say anything. We ate some awful strange meat and some baked beans. At least I think that's what they were. Later that night I was sick. In the morning, when we had been on the road for about 3 hours, a band of Indians came riding toward us. What are we supposed to do? I said to Ann. They've risen up all over the country. They're on the warpath. We're going to take over the government, she said. But what about right now? I said. Just be nice, she said. When they came alongside of the car, Ann stopped and rolled down her window. Howdy, fellow Americans, she said. Can you tell us how to get to Topeka? He said. Sure, that's easy, she said, and proceeded to give him directions. That's most helpful, he said. Have a good day. We drove on with the sun glaring. Where are we going? Do I look like I know where I'm going? I just want to get as far away from here as I can, she said. What about our old friends, I said. You'll just have to make new ones, she said. Patagonia, is that where we're going, I said. No, we're not going to Patagonia. I don't know where we're going, she said. We're getting low on gas, and I don't think there's going to be a station for a long time, I said. Then we'll just have to walk, she said. I was beginning to see how crazed she was, and it frightened me. We don't have anything to eat, I said. You can kill a jackrabbit, she said. There was an old shepherd up ahead, moving his flock across the road. When we pulled to a stop, she said, "Get out and grab one of those sheep and throw it in the back seat." I said, "I'm not going to do that. There's no way." She looked at me, then opened her door and went and grabbed the sheep around its waist and tried to heft it up. She dropped it and tried again. It took all of her strength to drag it over to the car. She finally stuffed it in the back seat before the shepherd saw what she had done. He pounded on the window and hit it with his staff. "A curse on you! I put a curse on you!" he shouted. She rolled down her window and yelled back at him, "National security! It's for your own good." This is called The Ice Cream Man. I answered an ad in the paper. I'd been unemployed for 9 months and was desperate. At the interview, the man said, "Do you have much experience climbing tall mountains?" "Absolutely, I climb them all the time. If I see a tall mountain, I have to climb it immediately," I said. "What about swimming long distances in rough ocean waters, perhaps in a storm?" he said. "I'm like a fish. You can't stop me. I just keep going in all kinds of weather," I said. "Could you fly a glider at night and land in a wheat field, possibly under enemy fire?" he said. "Nothing could come more naturally to me." "How are you with explosives?" "Would a large building, say 20 stories high, present you with much difficulty?" he said. "Certainly not. I pride myself on a certain expertise." "And I take it you are fully acquainted with the latest in rocket launchers and landmines," he said. "I even own a few of them myself for personal use." "They're definitely no problem for me," I said. "Now, Mr. Strafford, or may I call you Stephen, what you'll be doing is driving one of our ice cream trucks, selling ice cream to all the little kids in the neighborhoods. But sometimes things get tricky. We all like our drivers to be well-trained and well-equipped to face any eventuality, you know. Some fathers can get quite irate if you are out of the flavor of the kid, or a kid drops a cone," he said. "I understand. I wouldn't hesitate to take appropriate action," I said. "And there are certain neighborhoods where you're under advisement to expect the worst: sneak attacks, gang tactics, bodies dropping from trees, or rising out of manholes, blockades, machine gun fire, launched explosives, flamethrowers, and that kind of thing. You can still do a little business on the side if you're on your toes. Do you see what I'm saying?" he said. No problem. I know those kinds of neighborhoods, but as you say, kids still want their ice cream, and I wouldn't let them down. Good, Stephen. I think you're going to like this job. It's exciting and challenging. We've, of course, lost a few drivers over the years, but mostly it was because they weren't paying attention. It's what I call the Santa Claus complex. They thought they were just there to make the kids happy, but there's a lot more to it than that. One of our best drivers had to level half a city once. Of course, that was an extreme case, but he did what needed to be done. We'll count on you to be able to make that kind of decision. You'll have to have all your weapons loaded and ready to go at a moment's notice. You'll have your escape plans with you at all times. Yes, sir, I'll be ready at all times. And as you know, some of the ice cream is lethal. So that will require a quick judgment call on your part as well. Mistakes will inevitably be made, but try to keep them to a minimum. Otherwise, the front office becomes flooded with paperwork. I assure you, I will use it only when I deem it absolutely necessary, I said. Well, Stephen, I look forward to your joining our team. They're mostly crack professionals, ex-Green Berets and Navy SEALs, that kind of thing. At the end of the day, you've made all those kids happy, but you've also thinned out the bad seeds and made our city a safer place to be, he said. He sat there smiling with immense pride. How will I know which flavor is lethal? I said. Experiment, he said. I looked stunned, then we both started laughing. And this last poem is called The Cowboy. Someone has spread an elaborate rumor about me that I was in possession of an extraterrestrial being. And I thought I knew who it was. It was Roger Lawson. Roger was a practical joker of the worst sort, and up till now I had not been one of his victims. So I kind of knew my time had come. People parked in front of my house for hours and took pictures. I had to draw my blinds and only went out when I had to. Then there was a barrage of questions. What does he look like? What do you feed him? How did you capture him? And I simply denied the presence of an extraterrestrial in my house. And of course this excited them all the more. The press showed up and started creeping around my yard. It got to be very irritating. More and more came and parked up and down the street. Roger was really working overtime on this one. I had to do something. Finally I made an announcement. I said, the little fellow died peacefully in his sleep at 11:02 last night. Let us see the body, they clamored. He went up in smoke instantly, I said. I don't believe you, one of them said. There is nobody in the house, or I would have buried him myself, I said. About half of them got in their cars and drove off. The rest of them kept their vigil, but more solemnly now. I went and bought some groceries. When I came back, about a half an hour later, half of them had gone. When I went into the kitchen, I nearly dropped the groceries. There was a nearly transparent fellow with large pink eyes, standing about 3 feet tall. Why did you tell them I was dead? That was a lie, he said. You speak English, I said. I listened to the radio. It wasn't very hard to learn. Also, we have television. We get all your channels. I like cowboys, especially John Ford movies. They're the best. What? He said. What am I going to do with you? I said. Take me to meet a real cowboy. That would make me happy, he said. I don't know any real cowboys, but maybe we could find one. People will go crazy if they see you. We'd have press following us everywhere. It would be the story of the century, I said. I can be invisible. It's not hard for me to do, he said. I'll think about it. Wyoming or Montana would be the best bet. But they're a long way from here, I said. Please, I won't cause you any trouble, he said. It would take some planning, I said. I put the groceries down and started putting them away. I tried not to think of the cosmic meaning of all this. Instead, I treated him like a smart little kid. Do you have any sarsaparilla, he said. No, but I have some orange juice. It's good for you, I said. He drank it and made a face. I'm going to get the maps out, I said. We'll see how we could get there. When I came back, he was dancing on the kitchen table, a sort of ballet, but very sad. I have the maps, I said. We won't need them. I just received word. I'm going to die tonight. It's really a joyous occasion, and I hope you'll help me celebrate by watching the Magnificent Seven, he said. I stood there, and with the maps in my hands, I felt an unbearable sadness come over me. Why must you die, I said. Father decides these things. It's probably my reward for coming here safely and meeting you, he said. But I was going to take you to meet a real cowboy, I said. Let's pretend you are my real cowboy, he said. Thank you.
Thank you so much, James. That was great. Our second reader tonight is Fanny Howe. Fanny Howe was born in Buffalo, New York in 1940. Since then, she has become a prolific poet, novelist, and essayist, winning multiple awards for her collections of poetries and novels, including most recently the Ruth Lilly Award for the Lifetime Achievement in the Art of Poetry. Howe is the author of over 20 books of poetry and prose, including most recently A Winter Sun. In 2005, her collection of poems entitled The Lyrics was a Griffin International Poetry Prize finalist. Her other titles include Selected Poems, which was the recipient of the 2002 Lenore Marshall Poetry Prize, Forged, One Crossed Out, and Poem from a Single Palette. She has also won awards from the National Endowment of the Arts, the National Poetry Foundation, the California Councils of the Arts, and the Village Voice, as well as fellowships from the Bunting Institute and the MacArthur Colony. She has lectured at Tufts University, Emerson College, Columbia University, Yale University, and the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. Ladies and gentlemen, please once more, let's welcome Fanny Howe.
That I wrote poems for all those notable awards. It's wonderful just to be sitting here between Jim and John. I was sort of trying to respond to the idea of the voice the strange voice, or the voice of the stranger, when I chose a couple of poems to read before I read my own. And one is a poem by a Vietnamese poet whose name I'm not even going to try to say, and two are by Dorothy Wordsworth, whose poems were actually prose in her famous Grasmere journals. And the reason I put them together is because I love the voice of the translator, which is so full of equanimity and distance, and I feel that she captures that voice, and so I wanted to put, those are to me strange voices, is when you can hit that translator's tone. So beginning with this first one called Autumn Landscape, which was translated from the Vietnamese by John Balaban. Drop by drop, rain slaps the banana leaves. Praise whoever sketched this desolate scene. The lush, dark canopies of the gnarled trees, the long river sliding smooth and white. I lift my wine flask, drunk with rivers and hills. My backpack, breathing moonlight, sags with poems. Look and love everyone. Whoever sees this landscape is stunned. And then the two by Dorothy Wordsworth, who was living at the time, at the same time as that poem was written in Vietnam, in England. We saw a raven very high above us. It called out, and the dome of the sky seemed to echo the sound. It called again and again as it flew onwards, and the mountains gave back the sound, seeming as if from their center, a musical, bell-like answering to the bird's hoarse voice. We heard both the call of the bird and the echo, after we could see him no longer. We stood there a long time, the whole scene impressive, the mountains indistinct, the lake calm and partly ruffled, a sweet sound of water falling into the quiet lake. A storm was gathering in Easdale, so we returned. But the moon came out and opened to us the church and village. Helm Crag in shade, the larger mountains dappled like a sky. We stood long upon the bridge, wished for William. She was missing her brother. And now I'm going to move on to a poem which I wrote after going to St. Petersburg, and I've mentioned this poem to John before. And it really, because I've been coming to the seminar throughout this term and thinking about the whole idea of the stranger, I had to remember that for women, men are strangers. And this hasn't really been mentioned that much during the time we've been together, so I felt that it was something to bring up. First of all, that the world of power and men stands around us as we enter in as women, and then we produce children who are also strangers as they're born, as the baby as the stranger. So the woman is the sort of astonished figure in the middle of the world, to me. I'm watching these risings of power and strangeness around her. And so I was going to read this poem that brought that up for me because the experience of being in Russia, which is a very macho culture, had brought up. And the thing at the end I mentioned is the Theotokos, which is the icon of the Mother of God, which everybody I'm sure has seen, the Russian icon of the brown-faced Madonna with her baby. So it ends with that, but the rest of it is nothing there. So it's called After Watching Klimov's Agonia, which is a movie made by Elem Klimov, who's not a well-known but a great Russian filmmaker. And he made a film also, as I'm making this little film, based on the life of Rasputin. The peasant crosses from the farm to a train and enters a tunnel to the palace. The future watches him coming like a child whose doll falls from her hands when the living approach. Ultimately, he will be autopsied by nihilists who act like God and photograph his corpse. The state goes on with its grim task of arresting its critics. Find me a person, any person, and I will find a way to discredit him. What was alcohol for a peasant was heroin for Stalin. The photographs of Rasputin's face make me wish I could meet him and vomit. They are like unwrapped gauzes imprinted with mummies. His voracious gaze, his wild hair. They poisoned his cake and wine and shot him twice. But he wouldn't die, so they tossed him through a hole in the frozen river. When the police found him, his arms were raised to lift the ice. People dropped buckets in that superhuman water and drank. Without an element of atheism, no religion can be credible. A black frost dapples his face and torso. They pickled his lingam. It was so long they wanted to watch it. He started life as a poor agrarian boy who got in trouble with the authorities. Then he had a vision and walked from Siberia to Mount Athos. Now he represents a question. What makes one person unable to inhabit his own skin? Once there was metaphysical socialism, call it Christianity, or Gnosticism. Images of munitions and wolves were sewn into his vestments. Because he was uncultivated, he was dangerous. A serf, a monk, and a drunk, haunting the royal family. We have to face reality. We are glad we were born in the West. There, we said it. Shame of embourgeoisement covers us. Shame on behalf of the women and children who defended their city, digging trenches in snow. Tarkovsky's Ivan, who lived in rooms smelling of wood and urine. Garlic, salt, and black bread for supper. The fountains play at the Western Palace from 8 to 5 p.m. The spouts work on a system of gravity that God or someone invented. This discovering will become important to missile development. What went wrong when we were young? We had friends who became enemies of the state with us, students who turned into deserters, then returned to capitalism. All was forgiven. So what did we fail to do then? Carry through. Reconstruction was the next ideology. Proud-bellied white men from the West got the last laugh. Since the invention of the laptop, disconnected figures flow from discarded works. Phrases are resurrected. Isn't this blasphemy, like showing a saint in ballet tights? When these 4 words, "you look well fed," are said, you are doomed by your revolutionary companions. You have no right to complain, having chosen to seek a piece of the pleasure. Some moments in history last too long. They could have been whims, but they became plans. Beauty is a despised agent for religion under these conditions. I open my eyes and can't hear a word from the days of rebellion. But when I close them, I hear continuing revolution. The spoils of a lost war, all wars dry up into scabs, have turned libraries upside down, and texts are turned into clips. Every old misery holds interest. Father got worried when I went to the far left and called me self-indulgent. Mother laughed when I became a Catholic. She didn't believe it. I left the blackened house and walked in the dark, throwing ballast overboard for the sake of a future of solitariness. To the seeker, all objects are lonely and dangerous. Great films begin in chaos. They are made in order to show the abyss emerging into laws. Like Pope John Paul, certain directors only want the splendor of truth. Turgenev wonders if it's possible that all the tears and prayers of people can be fruitless. No, he protests. The indifference of nature is a foretaste of eternity and its mercy. On the steps of the Czech embassy in London, there's a splash of birdship. I sit beside it, reassembling the bits of sound for this poem. Words know everything. That's why my fingers shake. Nietzsche was a saint, but he made a mistake. He believed in humanity. Almost everything in that cafe is weaker than the air that surrounds it. Glasses hang upside down drying. A mirror reflects the room like an artist who is blind to what she is making. The operation of a Gnostic is pure sex, but love apes its way through the interstices, sticks there like a dent in an inchworm's back. You can't take it out because it's the thing itself. Love is the green in green. Does this explain its pain? Since love came over and knocked me down, then kicked me in the side and fled, I have suffered from a prolonged perplexity. God is the object of my wonder and the closest to me, especially near sleep. My sheets are like the wings of a guardian angel. There is no other fabric so near to my feelings. I haunt a dark cathedral, its single light coming from the gift shop, and follow the priest's movements. For here is the truth, both worldly and eternal, a heart of gold in the roaring vault. Here a weeping Madonna is kissed all day, while an old woman wipes away the stain with a gray cloth. The Mass is focused on the resurrection, not the passion. In this place, a grandmother is called white if she has healing powers. Rasputin had the power in his hands, yet Akhmatova shared a train compartment with him and felt faint looking at his pale eyes. Each iris in either eye saw around the pupil. I feel sick looking at the photos of his eyes, his penis, his beard and blood, violent, skinhead, racist, nationalist, sexist, illiterate men would appreciate him for the wrong reason. Rasputin played dog and crawled into the royal dining room. "You smell like a mushroom," he barked and called on Jesus to bless the soldiers who refused to kill the workers. He was like a dry root in motion. Women loved him and let him achieve ecstasy on top of them. This was his Gnostic and Tantric obsession. He lived without hate. He could stop a migraine with his hands and was seen praying in a forest for hours on end and by his bed alone. If only he had never taken up wine. Now the children climb over the rails around the station. The siege of renovation raised them. Blocks and forests raised and built on. Cement units they can't afford to live in. The kids have behaved like spawn, born to be the end of the line, or not fully born. Porn-driven thugs, mafiosi, right-wing Christians. Only hope can save them, or an invasion by Muslims or oceans. Who are dubbed the new stupids? The workers. The revolutionists were long ago strung up, and the old did not survive the cold. You could write music on the waterlines around their flooded tenements. The peasant mocked institutions that Ratzinger would prize. It was the student uprising of '68 that turned him against the left. Nowadays, in every bureaucracy, including the Vatican, there are two of everything, of everyone, two of each who look exactly alike. It's the softness in the chin that undefines them. Each one is the half-brother of a twin. Likewise, communism is secular Christianity. Either you fear or thank someone and stay anonymous. One poet recreated a new language out of his nanny's fireside stories. This way his childhood survived, the way dinosaurs become birds. While painting takes time and gives headaches, a digital camera doesn't blink, and this produces a lack of analogies. It's not an open eye, but an impure certainty. Empty frames stand waiting under the stairs. They wait for a thought that carried Dante with it, a long and difficult thought, full of stains and imperfect figures, suffering and acid rain. Don't plan any parties for Lent, a man called up in Italian. And in the dream, the shutter kept opening and closing like an anemone. Each hour was the same as the one before. The roads we did not choose began in a town where we were born. Here a gun might go off, there perhaps a broom would brush away the sticks of spring. It was not your fault where you were dropped or where you took your first steps, the red church down the lane, the red sail on the bay. These had nothing to do with you when you first arrived on earth. A peasant might prefer smoking weed to whacking at wheat all day. How else would a vision find and know him? In a remote fishing village and on its wet stone steps, the clink of the ropes and rings on the boats was the only sound, then footsteps. The sun broke through onto buses and houses. High up, a man and a woman, both old and on their own, crossed paths without looking. Then she noticed him and he her. A hurried exchange of recollections followed and half promises to meet someday. And then he continued to mount the side of the hill to his house while she went down to the highway. Absolutely nothing happened except recognition that left an ache. Each wore the face of the Theotokos when the icon is shut away. So that's that, and then I'll just end up with a few little short poems. Very short. Very fast. It'll be over in a minute. Joy. Do I have content? No. A mirror on a winter night is what I have, and mental light. Look out, see in. Bed. A map of heaven has pins stuck in it for each soul being prayed for. Pins, pins like stars. The map hangs at certain hours when the lace cuts snowflakes out of a hard wall, or when a car drives by and casts a yellow square, a yellow brick. The fetal life of the infant Christ is the first example of humanation. Here we study in miniature the evolution of a creature who later prays for God to stay with her. And this is the last one. The beauty of it. My recognition first funneled in from the nunnery next door, blew into a colorless orb that carried me finally from my sleeping baby all the way to the kingdom of air. The air was too shiny to distinguish from anything but the crib. Thank you.
Thank you, Fanny, very much. Our third and final reader tonight is John Ashbery. John Ashbery was born in Rochester, New York in 1927. He is the author of numerous collections of poetry. In 1956, W.H. Auden selected some trees for the Yale Younger series of younger poets. In 1975, his self-portrait in a convex mirror won the 3 major American prizes: the Pulitzer, the National Book Award, and the National Book Critics Circles Award. His most recent volumes include Your Name Here, Chinese Whispers, Where Shall I Wander, and A Worldly Country. Ashbery's Notes from the Air, selected later poems, won the 2008 Griffin International Poetry Prize. Last fall, Library of America published his collected poems 1956 to 1987, and an exhibition of his collages from 1948 to 2008 was held at the Du Bois-Denage Gallery in New York City. The UK edition of his translations of Pierre Muratori's poems, The Landscapist, was a Poetry Book Society recommended translation, and the US edition of the same volume was a finalist for the 2009 National Book Critics Circle Award for Poetry. He has been honored internationally, and most recently from the Paris Review for a Lifetime Achievement Award, the 2009 Hadada, and as well as the 2009 award Harvard Arts Medal. Planisphere, his collection of new poems, will be published this fall. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome John Ashbery.
Thank you. I'm going to first read a poem by Pierre Muratori, whom Adam mentioned. He's not known in his native France because he never really tried to publish his poems there. He was a friend of mine, and I translated him because I realized otherwise none of his poems would ever be printed in any language. And that book, The Landscapists, which came out this year as a collection of my translations, his dates are 1920 to 1998, I believe. The poem of his that I'll read is called Blues, the same title in French and in English. The bed of the railway links me to these days of hell. The bed of the railway, just one night can do it all. Love of the others, you wear me out with great strokes of a stiff brush. In a station of Paris, is there a true love that smiles? In a station of Paris, everything begins and everything fails. Love of the others, you suck the young blood of my life. And the words of my big brother, I can still hear them on my cot. And the words of my big brother, can it be he forgot? Love of the others, you are slow to promise a reward. So be it, my child, some people are never satisfied. So be it, my child, some win, some fall by the wayside. Love of the others, you put out my eyes by dint of fevers. Goodbye is a big handkerchief of paper that you throw in the sewer once it's been soiled with tears. Love of the others, you leave in my mouth a taste of clay. And this is my stranger poem called Parergon, a word which means a work which is a byproduct of another work, or so I understand it. We are happy in our way of life. It doesn't make much sense to others. We sit about, read, and are restless. Occasionally it becomes time to lower the dark shade over it all. Our entity pivots on a self-induced trance like sleep. Noiseless, our living stops, and one strays, as in a dream, into those respectable purlieus where life is motionless and alive, to utter the few words one knows. Oh, woe-begone people, why so much crying, such desolation in the streets? Is it the present of flesh that each of you at your jagged casement window should handle, nervous unto thirst and ultimate death? Meanwhile, the true way is sleeping. Your lawful acts drink an unhealthy repose from the upturned lip of this vessel secretly. But it is always time for a change. That certain sins of omission go unpunished does not weaken your position, but this underbrush in which you are secure is its doing. Farewell, then, until under a better sky we may meet expended, for just doing it is only an excuse. We need the tether of entering each other's lives, eyes wide apart, crying. As one who moves forward from a dream, the stranger left that house on hastening feet, leaving behind the woman with a face shaped like an arrowhead, and all who gazed upon him wondered at the strange activity around him, how fast the faces kindled as he passed. It was a marvel that no one spoke to stem the river of his passing, now grown to flood proportions, as on the sunlit mall or in the enclosure of some court. He took his pleasure, savage and mild with the contemplating. Yet each knew he saw only aspects, that the continuity was fierce beyond all dream of enduring, and turned his head away, and so the lesson eddied far into the night. Joyful its beams, and in the blackness blacker still, though undying joyousness caught in that trap. I'm going to read some more recent poems, which will be in this new collection that Adam Fitzgerald just mentioned called Planetsphere. Alcove. Is it possible that spring could be once more approaching? We forget each time what a mindless business it is, porous like sleep, adrift on the horizon, refusing to take sides, mugwump of the final hour, lest an agenda, horrors be imputed to it, and the whole point of its being spring collapse like a hole dug in sand. It's breathy, though, you have to say that for it. And should further seasons coagulate into years like spilled, dried paint, why, who's to say we weren't provident? We indeed looked out for others as though they mattered, and they, catching the spirit, came home with us, spent the night in an alcove from which their breathing could be heard clearly. But it's not over yet. Terrible incidents happen daily. That's how we get around obstacles. B's mysterious greeting at the initial B. Dreaming of Les Deux Magots in New England, of spring before the drawn curtain of a snow shower, I have to ask, why do these ideas circle me in different seeming buzzards? And then the shock of the told mysteriously comes to buttress me. I dream of married couples having sex, shopping, everything, and often get the giggles staying here, expecting something new to come along every 5 seconds. That's new to me. I expect others will have heard about it. Nonetheless, one has to say clamped in simple ballet activity. The masters don't reign, yet by the same token, they're not here either. In order not to arouse suspicious activity, pretended conversation surrounds us like the air, known, invisible. And sure enough, it's better out and back around those self-forgetting trees. Breath-like. Just as the day could use another hour, I need another idea, not a concept or a slogan, something more like a rut made thousands of years ago by one of the first wheels as it rolled along. It never came back to see what it had done, and the rut just stayed there, not thinking of itself or calling attention to itself in any way. Sun baked it, water stood or rather sat in it, wind covered it with dust, then blew it away. Always it was available to itself when it wished to be, which wasn't often. Then there was a cup and ball theory I told you about. A lot of people had left the coast. Squirt conditions obtained. I forgot I overwhelmed you once upon a time, between everybody's sound sleep and waking afterward, trying to piece together what had happened. The rut glimmered through centuries of snow and after. I suppose it was trying to make some point, but we never found out about that, having come to know each other years later when our interest in zoning had revived again. Chair rental. Very little was known about anything in the old time. It was as a vocalise is to a sonata. Children in the limelight and water rushing over stones as though in a hurry to get somewhere. It's possible to joke about it now that the trial period has lapsed, to not admit you're miscast. America's old churches were seen as a new philosophy of one-upmanship, playing yet not part of the game. Thus many things endure, and no one gets very anxious about them. Spots like coins from a tree that who the heck could have foreseen in its time anyway. Just stand here. Call me potatoes and soap. Call me soap and potatoes. My husband's fiancée wished it otherwise. There you go. Decembrists. They met cute in the commissary, and for a while it seemed as if it was going to be like old times again. Then, as luck would have it, they ruled him out into a hole in Canada, the air dense with no Siams, applauded by no Goodnicks. I mean, it was awful, yet in a certain sense interesting. The horizons, the atmospherics. By evening, it felt like we were all breathing easier. A lake fanned out around the dock. Trestles reported from far away, confirming good news for many. And we lasted as one lives in a tree without thinking too much about it. You can't make these things up, put a price on it. In microscopic, supposedly disparate situations, he will be good in just about everything he does, snooping, giving us a chance to relax. How confident it was. As recently as what seems like today, we were mixing it up, what a dismal friend of mine called slurping, eager to flip our leaders the bird. Riffing brings us to odd headquarters. Isn't that what a charmed life is supposed to prevent, yet secretly encourage? He called, "Come up here." We grabbed another glimpse of the books in the carrel, sweet in their stamped bindings. Default mode. They were living in America at another time. They were living in America for the FBI. They were living in America shit wins. They were living in America on the border with Canada. They were living in America further gone into teats. They were living in America that was the only good one. They were living in America that was the only good one. They were living in America who answers the phone and. They were living in America deliriously. They were living in America sadly. They were living in America fictitiously. They were living in America wedged. They were living in America, Stella by starlight. They were living in America, the mighty sun. They were living in America pandemically. They were living in America across from the Ritz Hotel. They were living in America getting their chops. They were living in America only for just one summer. They were living in America beside the lake. They were living in America for the defeatist troops. They were living in America for the pleasure of it all. They were living in America as well as can be expected. They were living in America as one grows passionately out of a love affair. They were living there every day. Does this donut remind you of a life preserver? They were living in America to remind you of me. They were living in America and a storm blew up suddenly. They were living in America extended terms of credit. They were living in America, but it's all over. They were living in America as tissue paper is to a comb. They were living in America at 5s and 6s. They were living in America the same old, same old. Episode. In old days, when they tried to figure out how to write the sweetest melodies, they fell on a bed, chewed the pillow. A moon rankled in the crevices of a shutter. In 1935, the skirts were long and flared slightly, suitably. Hats shaded part of the face. Lipstick was fudgy and encouraging. There was music in the names of the years. 1937 was welcoming too, though one bit one's lip, preparing for the pain that was sure to come. That must be awful. I was hoping you could imagine it. Yet I will be articulate again and articulate what we knew anyway of what the lurching moon had taught us, seeking music where there's something dumb being said. And if it comes back to being all alone at the starting gate, so be it. We hadn't wanted this fuss, these extras. We were calm under an appearance of turmoil, and so we remain even today. An unwanted inspiration to those who come immediately after, as well as those who came before, lots of them, stretching back into times of discussion. I told you so. We can handle it. Hand on the stick shift, headed into a billboard labeled tomorrow, The Adventures of New Music, melismas shrouding the past and the passing days. The foreseeable future. And we just sat and dreamed, sailing around, trying to force the sad living of friends of every spilled government day. If I had perfect pitch, would I notice the buildup on that behindhand? Spray-on sex, he botanized. That could never happen. He's being held by Egyptian matrons. He who loves and runs away. The bad news is the ship hasn't arrived. The good news is it hasn't left yet. It is still being loaded by natives with cone-shaped hats on their heads. Here come the transistors, bananas, and durian, a fruit said to have a noxious smell, baby bottles, photocopiers, and souvenirs, such glorious ones, nothing useful except keychains, lockets to be furnished, a bowl to stuff with life. Yet it's hard not to imagine the loss. I think, though I can't be sure, that all this is being added to my bill. Woe betide us. We shall never pay, though, not in a million years. Everything is promise. Too late we acted outside the rhymes required. Honest, God-fearing, ass-wearing blokes, eager to accept the hand that fate had dealt us and play with it. Now brown sorrow is the correct livery for when we go out. It's important to find a copy of the reproduction and send or sell it back to them, and with milk. That was the nicest thing about them, happy birthday. For it you got a mandate? Because I like it better here, near the core. You are sitting on the sofa. Have a glass of something. You will hear a city. The logistics. Then tomorrow. We'll travel. The day will be a scorcher, some say. Travel beyond the rocks to a taped place some will recognize, others not so much, some not at all. What place is this? To come back for a few hours to a city of 20,800 people, all good citizens, stout in work and doing, washed over by a wave. They keep ducking, imagining. It doesn't dovetail with the middle of the beginning, the time we lost getting here, the few friends who stayed with us, faithful to the ends of fronds. Some beginning they puked, and get us out of here, we're magicians too. Sorry it doesn't balance out the way they dressed and traveled past the farthest signs, in fact to explore, as none then knew. Sorry, it's raining. Even if you like the rain, it's raining somewhere, nowhere you can see. And the people, they've left too, wedged in a fucking dream. More of what happened. The mild stars shone for us, moving toward the decorative fire escape, seeking a tower to escape the sun above the roiling city. Surely it was for you and me. The unexpectedness of our music flooded us early. There were two ways about it. Man abandoned by his hopes drums a little life into the countryside. Then the periods collapse. From our rising up to our going down, everybody was nice. Favors overwhelmed us for a little while. Days subsided as patient crowds looked on. No space here for losers, or even what passes as successful in flyover states. In Fort Wayne, rubber cement was growing tacky. Silhouettes criticized their want of substance. Aida and Don Jose, thoughtful along the parapet, communicate. Do you chew gum? I suppose so. Do you believe in long engagements? It'll be better, a better day. Yes, and when all dreams come up for renewal, wiser to seek the unknown in the interior at its last address. Familiarity like that is forged over decades, separating the silence from the talkies, the savanna from the brush. One was encouraged into intimacy. Ideas started that way like froth at first. Then we flirted with something downhill. Pernilla, the woman's name. Please don't apologize for pissing me off. You were probably right, and I was halfway out the door anyway, the living room door leading to the hall and all it contains. How is it that things can get shiny and be peeling simultaneously? Seriously, Pa, we would have come over if we'd knowed the combination for long, and then folks would have pointed toward us, miming birdsong and the like. It was too short a time to have wrapped many pensées in, but we weren't blighted by that near the tower. One who calls in need out of the dusk fancied our situation, but we were not to be perturbed by that, only a little fluted toward day's indisputable margin. I say, how do you like it? And the bills floating along beside it, like baby ducks after the mother has moved on to some important barrier that will rise up like a chapter heading in later life when all is pretty much paved over and weeds have begun to take hold. I said, how long do you expect it and us to go on nourishing whatever it is we do nurture? Madness, you implied, to get so near the torrent and not stumble, taking all things together. And we do that, just don't advertise it. Come back another day and I'll have forms for you with the prices, as well as samples held close to the waist. That sure was fun the day we took our gum out and the trees lurched overhead. It was almost like being in a storm with no clouds around to blame it on. Yes, well, I imagined other settings for our unease than this. Now I'm mortified. No, you're not, she says. Pick up here where it says lost and join the boys in the harbor, whether they have water wings or not, just bare chest bones boring through the gloom, and you lean up against one whose sister is in Arcady, and it plops the question just like that, you old so-and-so, and needs must be gone in any case, though the hour isn't urgent, and the landmass teeters once more, crashing out of gloaming onto the floor near your heels. This is a collage made out of movie titles, which the title is a title also of a movie. They knew what they wanted. They all kissed the bride. They all laughed. They came from beyond space. They came by night. They came to a city. They came to blow up America. They came to rob Las Vegas. They dare not love. They died with their boots on. They shoot horses, don't they? They go boom. They got me covered. They flew alone. They gave him a gun. They just had to get married. They live. They loved life. They live by night. They drive by night. They knew Mr. Knight. They were expendable. They met in Argentina. They met in Bombay. They met in the dark. They might be giants. They made me a fugitive. They made me a criminal. They only kill their masters. They shall have music. They were sisters. They still call me Bruce. They won't believe me. They won't forget. I'll read, I guess, two more. This is This is another film-related poem. The Tower of London isn't really a tower. It's a square building with towers at each of the four corners. In the 30s, they made a movie of it starring Boris Karloff as Mord, the executioner, who dabbled in torture. A busy man was Mord. His boss, Richard III, was demanding. Richard had no hump on his back, but Boris had a club foot as though to make up for it. Richard drowned the Duke of Clarence, whose name wasn't Clarence, in a tub of Malmsey, a sweet-tasting wine. Clarence had stood in his way. Richard was determined to kill all who stood in his way, including the princes in the tower, two little boys, practically infants, the sons of old Henry VI, or maybe of Richard's half-brother Edward, played by Ian Hunter. Richard was played by Basil Rathbone, who also played Sherlock Holmes. The princes, also named Richard and Edward, I believe, hadn't done anything. They didn't deserve to be killed. But then none of them did, including old Henry VI, though he was quite dotty at the time. Richard's bride was unlike the queen in the play Richard III. She was played by Barbara O'Neill, who played Scarlett O'Hara's mother in Gone with the Wind, though she wasn't old enough to be. That's the way I remember it. Wait, she was actually Edward's wife. Richard took unto him the Lady Anne, who was played by Nan Gray, though she actually married Wyatt, John Sutton, after they escaped from the tower or the castle. In the end, Richard killed just about everybody except Mord, who got thrown off a cliff by somebody, a fitting end to a miserable career. The winemakers. It wasn't meant to stood for what it stood for. Only a pup tent could do that. Besides, we were in a state called New York, where only bees made sense. Those who were with us were not with us and deserved a spanking. Others, looking out over the bay's mild waters, could barely distinguish a message made of logs. Return to the frontier or all is lost, though in time some may reap the benefit and glory of a frozen attitude. My mind was made up. We would start for Illinois that very day. Have you considered firecrackers? The deft music contained therein assuages all contenders. Those who arrived last at the party received the most intelligent door prizes. My niece is in Nepal. My name was memorized last week for the chilling rolls to come, in which foot soldiers gasp, giggle, and dream. Say this for warmer climes, though. Bears are let out at night to patrol the streets. In the morning, hope flushes the city anew. I guess it was just that I always thought of snow at the wrong times, and defeatism came charging through the barricades. It always knew where to find me. Funny, few can now remember how water came in pails once, and sails were free for anyone who needed them for a boat. Besides this, 6 different types of student were always shackled to the end of the wharf in case anybody could use them for anything. I think there's a big old wind mask out near the glue factory. So many kinds of hope began the race. Some morphed into local interest along the way. Others discharged family and civic responsibilities. Each of us was assigned a particular task, though none realized it until the task was accomplished and forgotten. The brouhaha of learning didn't seem to affect some any more than it did their teachers, by now asleep. Night was soft for that sort of thing. You remember the little electrical villages down the road? I'll have a mustard Coke. In ordinary times, a store can find that. But we live in a peculiar era. You can't get from there to here. Well, now it's something I'd be happy to write about. It lands on your roof, a small package, loved and warmed. For all your posturing, you'd say so too, I'd wager. Well, that's enough of that now. Better stack our hats in the cloud chamber. Her magical bracelet opened suddenly as though it were Christmas. We better be getting along before it gets dark or there's no way out of the box. They don't carry them anymore, besides which there's not much interest. Only songs of the night and fruits so beautifully presented you'd swear you were in Asia the time before this one, whatever it is, or where we fetched up in the last century, the recent one, I mean. Like a dance, it completed itself and ran out. Hey, it was just here. So it is with the things that were more or less dear to us and are now enfolded in the dream of their happening. A man comes to the end of the drive, looks around. No one sees him. He putters, and in the end is the last to leave. We may write about him or how his walk affected us. There he goes again. If tact is a mortal sin, we shall not miss. Thank you.
Thank you, John. I want to thank all of you for coming out tonight and remind you that tomorrow the festival will continue with Strange Image. The poets reading will be Henri Cole, Jory Graham, and Mark Strand. And then on Sunday with Strange Place, Adam Zagajewski, Lucy Brock-Boydo, and Derek Walcott. We're going to have a book signing very briefly. You're free to come down and buy some books which are outside. We have some books of all the poets' work, and I'm sure they'd be happy to sign a few for you. Thank you for coming out, and thank you all.